All right, folks, I just got through with a really good interview with Joel Skousen where we dove into pressing global issues and profound religious insights. Now, join me as I explore these topics ranging from the Balfour Declaration to the dynamics of Ukraine, the influence of Western globalism, and the strategic maneuvers of nations like Iran, Israel, China, and a lot of other things. We'll also discuss Putin's true nature, his true intentions, and the looming specter of maybe final wars. I talk a little bit about Bruce R. McConkie, some end time stuff. He talks about it a little bit. And alongside these, we'll reflect on the role of the church in the last days and innovative strategies for gathering Israel for missionary work. In this journey, I'm often bewildered by Joel's insights. I admire his knowledge and his perspectives. And on geopolitical and historical matters, I greatly respect and agree with him. While I don't always see eye to eye with him doctrinally, but that's okay. Joel's insights offer valuable lessons on the importance of engaging with and while learning from those that we don't always entirely agree with. But I would advise you to pay attention to this guy when it comes to what's going on in the world as far as geopolitically. I've had him on the program for the last several months. I'm thankful that he comes on once a month, and I hope to continue to see him. Anyway, without further ado, here's my interview with Joel Skousen. All right, I'm excited. I am stoked. Folks, let's welcome once again the master of all things geopolitical and everything in between, Joel Skousen. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you very much. It's so good to be with you again, Troy.
Now, yes, it's good to be with you. I want to ask you something first, just to vet your personality. Do you like cats? Are you a cat person?
Yes, I do. And I didn't used to like dogs, but I have a great big 150-pound dog now, and I love him.
Amazing. Then you are a pet person.
You have to have time to take care of animals and give them the kind of attention. And I found in my older age, I have the time now that I didn't when I was a youth. And when you move around as a young family, it's hard to move pets too, but I'm a real pet lover.
That's good. Yeah, I notice the older I get, the more I'm into pets too, because everyone else is just kind of doing their own thing, but a pet is like always there to keep you company. I want to talk about the war in Israel. That's going to be my main concern here with this interview. But before we do that, your world affairs brief, what exactly is that? I know what it is. I want you to tell the folks here, what is it and how much does it cost?
Well, the World Affairs Brief is my weekly news analysis service of hot subjects around the world from the particular perspective of what the conspiratorial powers are not telling you. And I am probably the best and most knowledgeable expert on conspiracy in the world, and especially the big picture issues. A lot of experts on the JFK assassination or 9/11 that may exceed my knowledge in the details, but nobody has a broader big picture of where the globalists are going with these conspiratorial issues, how they're trying to take down national sovereignty, and how they built up Russia and China to be the foremost enemies to bring us into World War III. And so you'll get a unique perspective in the World Affairs Brief that you get nowhere else. It's not just like I'm reciting the news from Epic Times or Fox News or Breitbart even. I do give personal analysis of what this means in terms of the overall globalist conspiracy against liberty. And it costs, there is a subscription fee, and it does limit my subscribers. It costs $48 a year, which has been the same price since the year 2000. I've never raised the prices, so it's
Wow.
really a bargain now. And
That is a bargain.
Of inflated dollars. But people are used to getting free on the website. I mean, Pastor Chuck Baldwin has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but he's still dying on the vine financially because nobody pays him any money.
Right.
And so everyone's worth their value if you're giving valuable information.
Absolutely.
Worldaffairsbrief.com. And if your subscribers want a free sample issue, they could just click on request a sample on the left-hand side, and it tells them the various options to subscribe and how to get it online if your email gets blocked, because frankly, my conspiratorial views are often blocked by the internet, and so people have to resort to their password and to get it online.
I see. Yeah. No, that makes sense. An honest day's work deserves an honest uh, compensation. A lot of people don't understand that about what I do. They're like, how can you preach the gospel and get paid? That's priestcraft. I'm like, no, I'm not preaching the gospel. This isn't church. I'm not offering priesthood blessings for tokens or money. I'm not selling my tokens out of the temple. This is a platform. This is a program where we discuss things like this and a plethora of ideas and concepts concerning the gospel and other things. So I get it. And this is what I do for a living as well. Now, thank you. The World Affairs Brief. So I have the link right here in the description section, and it's right here, as you see before us, right below Joel. That is the World Affairs Brief. The next thing I want to do before we get to the war is ask you about your presidential run, your run for president of the United States of America. How is that going?
Well, it's actually not going well. The Constitution Party asked me to run for president because they didn't have a credible candidate.
Okay.
And, there's opposition in all things. And sure enough, after I joined, suddenly a guy named Randall Terry decides to run into the Constitution Party. Now, he's run for president as a Democrat, as an independent, as a Republican, and lost every time. He's a one-issue person. He's very, very anti-abortion, as I am as well. But he's particularly strident in his ads. He keeps talking about you've got blood on your hands if you're anywhere associated with it. And it really turns people off. And but he's got a lot of money from the pro-life and anti-abortion people. And while he claims he's going to promote the entire issue of restoring the Constitution, he really is a one-issue candidate. And his donors do expect him to run only anti-abortion ads or primarily anti-abortion ads. So, but the Constitution Party is a small party, and the people are just enamored with the fact that somebody's coming in with lots of money and going to run ads, which no Constitution Party candidate has ever been able to afford before.
Right.
And my approach to restoring the Constitution is a little bit complex for most members because I'm not satisfied with simply promoting a return to the Constitution. Because frankly, we already have the Constitution. And the lawyers tell me, oh, we don't mind if you restore the Constitution. We use it every day. Well, what they mean is we use case law to interpret the Constitution. And there's no way to overturn that unless you tighten up the language. And you can't dare do that through a constitutional convention because you'd have only mainstream lawyers and politicians attending or assigned to the convention, and they would change the Constitution for the worse. And so it's kind of a catch-22 situation. You can't get there with the existing document because they've interpreted it away. And you can't change it because we don't have the majority. And frankly, we're never going to have the majority because it's going downhill every day with increased immorality and gay and transgender confusion and the woke establishment forcing their opinions upon us. And public education, which continues to indoctrinate our children.
Right.
Well, not my children because we homeschooled them all. But unfortunately, a lot of members and conservatives still send their children to free public schools, which are paid for on the backs of those of us who don't support public schools.
Right. Exactly. And what your children they probably have grandchildren, huh?
Yeah. No, our children have children, so I have grandchildren.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. You're not that old, right? I told my wife the other day that President Nelson's, when he goes to family reunions, there's people like, this is my mom, this is my grandma, this is my great grandma, and that's my ancestor, and they're still alive. I think it's like 4 or 5 generations are almost not related to you anymore. All right, well, welcome. Let's get into the nitty gritty, and that is what's on a lot of people's minds right now, Joel. I don't know. Do you want to? I had some questions prepared, but then I'm like, I don't know. Let's talk about how this war might be related. Well, first of all, do you think this is an end time event happening? And then I want to go into how do you feel about Bruce R. McConkie's ideas about Armageddon, that million-man war, Gog and Magog. Are they the same thing to you? Bruce R. McConkie kind of combined all of that and said it's all the same thing. What are your thoughts and feelings about about that.
Well, let me first begin with a briefing on the latest Israel-Hamas war, because
Okay.
that's how we need to start, first of all. Now, we have to remember that Israel and the media, which is all pro-Israel, of course, is talking about Israel responding to this provocative attack by Iran. But that's a false narrative. Israel, for almost 5 years now, has been attacking Iranian bases in Syria, trying to provoke it to attack. And that's finally happened. So Israel is clearly responsible for provoking this attack. Why did they want to provoke the attack? Because they're led by a globalist. Benjamin Netanyahu is a Kissinger protege. Kissinger and Associates paid for his education in the US, set him up in Wall Street to make him wealthy, set him up in politics in Israel by holding a major anti-terrorism conference. Anybody who can do that in Israel is suddenly a hero. You can bring in international people like Henry Kissinger and other globalists. But what's the globalist objective? They want Iran removed as a power because Iran is the only Muslim country that is independent in arms manufacture without Western control. And they don't like that. Every other Muslim country, Saudi Arabia and others, and Qatar and others, are using Western equipment and under US control. And there's a lot of things to that. But Iran is not. Now, Iran, ever since the US allowed the Shah to fall and they allowed the Ayatollah to come in and take over Iran, has been a radical Muslim country. It's not a friend of liberty. It's not a friend of its own people. The vast majority of educated Iranians want to be friendly with the West. But when
No,
the
and then some of those people are still alive that were under the Shah. I mean, they're older, but
that's right.
that was a like a mind spin to those people. That was horrible.
Yeah. And so, but in any case, I'm not defending Iran as a good country. It's not. But in large extent, it's different from the Russian and Chinese and globalist, Western globalist conspiracy to take over and control a globalist New World Order. The Muslims simply have a mindset about taking over the world in the name of religion and mandating that religion upon other people. So it's not the same as the globalist New World Order conspiracy, which is much more dangerous between Russia, China, and the Western globalists. This is still a dangerous war for Israelis. And part of it is created by Israel because Iran knows that Israel is trying to kill it. And so it's obviously building nuclear weapons to try to deter that and to strike back. But this is not going to lead to nuclear war between the two, first of all, because I don't think Iran really has a nuclear weapon yet. Israel does have them, but they don't want to use them and create a nuclear holocaust that they'll be blamed for. But what's interesting about this is that Israel successfully deterred about 95% of the incoming 300 drones and missiles shot from Iran, as well as from the Houthis and from Lebanon, that occurred last Friday and Saturday. That's a very high percentage rate of anti. Now, a lot of that was helped out by U.S. F-16s out of Qatar and I'm sorry, F-15s out of Qatar and F-16s out of Jordan, with U.S.-backed anti-missile armament on their aircraft, AMRAAM, missiles and others. So it was a joint effort. It was very, very successful, but very expensive. In other words, Iranian missiles and drones average between $20,000 and $50,000, and the interceptors that the U.S. uses exceed those prices, and the larger interceptors in the Arrow missile system of Israel are like our Patriot missile, multiple thousands of dollars. The standard missiles 3 through 6 on our Aegis warships cost upwards of $2 to $4 million a shot against $40,000 drones and missiles. You can't keep this up indefinitely. And so that's the issue now, is that Israel had plans to counterattack with a large attack, probably aimed at Iran's nuclear facilities. But the U.S. nixed that and told Israel no certain terms of you to do that, not because they're trying to protect Iran, but because Iran has the capability and is threatened. If you think 300 missiles was a hardship, you wait till you get 10 times more of that in the next barrage if you retaliate. Remember, right. Iran is retaliating. So this is not a counterattack from Israel that's about an unprovoked. This is a counterattack to Iran's counterattack, which was provoked by Israel. So we've got to establish who's really to blame there and who's trying to provoke what. Now, I'm not saying that Iran wouldn't eventually attack Israel. They're clearly intended to do so. But we've got to remember as well that the U.S. has kept troops in Syria and Iraq specifically to act as bait to be killed by Iran in such a war, so that they can not only justify coming to the aid of Israel, but they can get American support for that aid to Israel and joining the war because we bloodied Americans' hands. America is very ruthless about allowing its own people to be bloodied to justify getting into war. Think Pearl Harbor.
Did you hear who was?
The U.S. knew the attack was coming. They let it happen. They didn't defend against, they didn't warn Pearl Harbor. They are responsible, the Roosevelt administration, for killing over 3,000 people in Hawaii. They're responsible for the 9/11 attack, which was the deep state operation from the hiring of the terrorists to the loading of the buildings with explosives. The U.S. deep state is responsible for that. So they don't mind killing Americans and getting us into the war. In fact, it's that phony war on terror that they went rampaging through Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11, who were nowhere near responsible for 9/11 at all. If anything, it was Saudi Arabia who provided the terrorists at the behest of the CIA.
Did you hear who was?
And who trained, some of those pilots secretly on larger airliners. Because if you trained on a Cessna, you wouldn't even know how to turn off the autopilot in an airliner, let alone take control of it and navigate
Right.
clear back to New York, which requires sophisticated knowledge of programming these computer systems. I know I'm a military fighter pilot. So the point is, this is a very complex conspiracy, but the real ringer in all of this is that for the U.S. being involved in planning on this attack, knowing that Israel's going to start it, America's going to get bloodied, that'll bring the U.S. into the war and will jointly eliminate Iran, has gone awry. The U.S. has given orders to Israel not to reattack in any major way, maybe a token attack. In fact, there's even been a secret communication with Iran that was revealed yesterday, where the U.S. told Iran, just be willing to accept a token attack from Israel to save face, but let's not make this into a larger war. Now, why is the U.S. suddenly trying to put a clamp down on this war when they've wanted this war for so many years? The reason is simple. The U.S. is running out of anti-missile and defense missiles, or at least their stockpiles are being drawn down to the extent, because of the war on Ukraine and
Okay.
the war against the Houthis, that a major war with Iran would require a very serious diminution in U.S. stockpiles of anti-missiles.
Teacher, I'm going to raise my hand if I have a question. Um, can does that mean we're expending our own resources to fund these wars for other people? Is that what you're saying? Like for Ukraine, are we just giving away our stockpile of stuff?
Yeah, we are. I mean, when you're putting F-16s into Ukraine, you're going to have to put in AIM-9 missiles and AMRAAM missiles and other things on those aircraft to be able to shoot down other aircraft. That's coming from our stockpile.
So does that mean that the people in control, the Western globalists, they don't care? Because we know that's who we have Biden in there, so we know who's in charge.
Biden isn't running anything.
Right. What I'm saying is, he is part of that Western globalist.
Sure.
So they are running things right now.
Yeah.
The United States is being ran internationally, basically, right? Would you say, or by some oligarchs or fake philanthropist types and autocrats?
The globalists used to be based in the city of London, mostly English conspirators, and now it's mostly in the U.S. So I won't say it's run internationally.
It's not the United Nations. It's not people in the United Nations.
Not run by the United Nations. The globalists, are going to have to dispense and get around.
And this isn't a Soros thing. He's kind of old and dying, or his son doesn't seem very smart to me. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
That's getting into the weeds of complexity about who are the globalists and who's running what part of the globalists. We could spend a whole time on the top level versus the mid level versus the WEF and it's just. I
guess my question is, whoever's in charge does not care about our protection.
Wrong.
Okay, go ahead.
They want this third world war, and they want to make sure they have enough of weapons to fight it once they induce and provoke this third war. Now, they don't really have to provoke it. They know that Russia and China have always planned as communists, and Russia's still communist because they faked their own demise in 1989 and 91.
Well, then why are we giving away our stuff if we want to win this war?
Well, it's a little complex, but for example, in the Ukraine wars, we've explained before, the globalists have built Russia as an enemy, given them the technology to MIRV their missiles, given them the nuclear technology to develop nuclear weapons, given them the first batch of enriched uranium We built Russia. We gave them $20 million for the Bolshevik revolution. Britain gave an equal $20 million, or actually in rubles, for the Bolshevik. We cut off military aid to the White Russians so the Bolsheviks could win. I mean, conservatives are stupid. They don't understand this conspiratorial history. They think that's why they believe the propaganda that Russia's the good guy in this war. They believe Putin when he told Tucker Carlson that we took down the Soviet Union. In fact, that was an admission that no leader had ever made before. The official narrative was that it was a spontaneous revolution that they couldn't control. And Putin admitted to Tucker, hey, we took down the Soviet Union. And then he lied again and he said it was to gain peace and cooperation with the West. No, it wasn't. It was to fool the West into letting down their guard and stop the war, the rearmament war, so that through aid and trade to Russia that they could get ahead, which has happened. And Russia's still back to where they were in the Soviet Union, except they don't control completely the former Soviet states. But you see, conservatives don't understand that the globalists always have to reverse course prior to the actual war that they create. In other words, they created Hitler, they funded his armaments, but before the war, they had to start attacking Hitler so that they're on the correct side of the war when Hitler finally attacked.
Yeah, we forget they're playing chess. And when you
That's
play
right.
chess, you have pawns and you have you sacrifice other things to achieve other things, right? And you have to pretend it's a play too. These people they're propagandists, and to propagandize you have to pretend that you are benign in certain ways, right?
That's right. And so you see, the globalists built Russia and China as enemies. Now they're reversing and attacking Russia. And so the conservatives think, oh, well, everyone that the globalists attacked before in the war of terror was innocent, so Russia must be innocent. And they believe the propaganda of Putin that he doesn't want NATO on his border. Well, he's already got NATO on his border in the Baltic states. And he likes having NATO in the former Soviet states in NATO because, you see, we never purged any of the communists out of Poland and Hungary and Romania and Ukraine when the phony fall happened. And so he's got plenty of spies in NATO. He doesn't mind having Poland or even Ukraine into NATO as long as he controls the country. He doesn't control Ukraine because Ukraine hates Russia because of the mass starvation which Stalin pulled on Ukraine in 1932 and 33, killed millions of Ukrainians. So when Putin
Well, is it true though that there are many Russians in Ukraine that want to Russia to annex them?
Absolutely. And Putin even told Tucker Carlson, he said, now Lenin and Stalin got together and decided to put the Donbass, which is Russian speaking, and Crimea, which is right into the borders of Ukraine. Notice, it wasn't the Westerners who put them in there. It was the Soviets that put them in there. Why? Putin said, I don't know why they did that. Well, he's lying. He knew that they were going to fake their own demise and had to have an excuse to come back in and attack Ukraine to save the Russians. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, the whole phony coup, what's called a Western coup in Ukraine, eliminating a legitimately elected president who was a communist, Viktor Yanukovych, was a phony coup as well. It wasn't a Western coup, even though the West financed the protest. It only succeeded because Yanukovych issued a stand-down order to the riot police, the Berkut, to allow the protest to win. In fact, there was no guards at the presidential palace on that day that they won. There was a stand-down order. That's like the January 6th protest going up to the Capitol, and there's no Capitol Police. Could they have given the stand-down order for the Capitol Police not to show up? No way. So you see, conservatives have to wake up to the fact that there are very sophisticated conspiracies going on. And we've got to
and they're very nuanced and complex, so it's not like just black and white stuff going on.
And conservatives want to believe who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Well, look, there are no good guys. Even Ukraine has its corruption because none of the communists were ever purged from the government. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't support Ukraine militarily. I do. I think we can't let Putin get away with this long-term ploy of faking your own demise so that you can come back in and reconquer countries. But I don't encourage giving any money to Ukraine because it goes down the corruption rat hole, just like Ukraine was corrupt enough to make deals with Biden and his son in Burisma. So it's a long and complex history, and that's why I put out the World Affairs Brief so that people understand this.
How many do you think the ratio of people in Ukraine that, and I didn't mean to get off on there, but I'm probably going to title this something to do with the war and also Ukraine, but it's an interesting question that I'm about to ask. What are the ratio of Ukrainians in Ukraine that want Russia to annex them? Is it the majority of Ukrainians?
No, not anywhere near the majority. It's
Would you
only
say
the
20%?
Yeah, it's only the Russian-speaking areas where there's a sentiment.
Where it's on the
What's
border
going
where all the
Yeah, where the fighting in eastern
yeah.
Ukraine. But remember, where there was more pro-Russian sentiment before is all removed now. Ukrainians in the western Ukraine, the free part of Ukraine, absolutely 100% hate Russia now because Russia's been destroying the civilians and destroying you talk about building hatred against who you're going to conquer. That's the way to do it, is destroy civilian infrastructure. That's why Israel's never going to have peace with Gaza. You've destroyed so much civilian
Right.
infrastructure. You've created so many enemies. Even if you eliminate Hamas, which is nearly impossible, they're going to regrow again because of all the hatred you've created.
Does that show that Vladimir Putin is not as strategic and intelligent as he makes us think he is? Like, that doesn't seem very wise to me. That is he a man of average intelligence, or does he have a high IQ?
Oh, I think he's got a fairly high IQ, but it's more, its high IQ isn't the essential, it's the degree of ruthlessness that a person has. I mean, Stalin wasn't the sharpest block.
Right. Can
But
you
boy,
fake it to make
he
it?
was ruthless. And you get enough sophisticated advisors around you that can correct and feed you the information you need to say. But boy, ruthlessness is what rules tyrannical governments, not IQ.
So you would say brawn over brains when it comes to dictatorships?
No, brawn inspires
What I mean is,
physical strength. No, we're talking about ruthlessness, drive, power hungriness, evil.
well,
And
I guess that's what I meant by brawn, not physical strength, but you don't have to have a high IQ then, I guess. I don't know. That's interesting.
No, you can't be dumb either. It takes a lot to manage these sophisticated conspiracies, and Russians are masters, and Chinese are masters of conspiracy as well.
Manipulation. They have to know how to manipulate people around them. Yeah,
and make them think that they're their friend. That's
right.
The Russian thing. Putin is just, that whole Tucker Carlson interview was designed to influence conservative Americans to get them to turn against Ukraine, and it worked. And my whole presidential campaign, if I ever got there, which looks unlikely now, but is going to be trying to get conservatives to understand the real issues in this Ukraine war, and that Russia is still an existential enemy, and so is China. It's not just that the globalists are our enemy. Yes, they are the enemy, and they're the ones that Satan ultimately will favor, but they are not.
Well, because they have the most power.
Yeah,
they're the most powerful. That's why. But you said
and they're the most sophisticated about deceiving their own people. Remember, the globalists use communists in BLM and Antifa and in Cuba and Nicaragua to break down nations in the social order, so the globalists can come in with their milder form of socialism that still tell you you're free, have you a Bill of Rights, but you're not free because of secret combination. The Russians and communists don't have anything on the globalists in terms of sophistication, because the Russians and communists have been ruthless with their people, and they create a lot of enemies. The globalists are only ruthless in private, like to the January 6 people who are holed up in jails with no fundamental rights, no constitutional rights, and yet Americans still think we're living in a free country. And that's the most naive thing about Mormons, is every time you have the 4th of July, you hear these prayers from the pulpit. We thank thee, O Lord, for the free country we live in. And it's not free anymore. It's only partially free. If I were praying, it would be, thank you, Heavenly Father, for you remaining freedoms that we still enjoy.
Well, it's sad. I also believe that our Constitution is not in operation right now as well. Our branches of government are like what do they call that? A kangaroo court, or what's the other? No, I'm getting that mixed up with a puppet regime, or just a fake parliament. What do they call that? There's a term for it. Where it's
shadow government sometimes.
Yeah.
In any case, they abide by the Constitution in easy manners to keep people thinking it's still alive. But if you get to be a dissident, you find out you have no rights. You can be locked up with indefinite, no trial. Notice how many January 6 people have been in prison for over 2 years without a trial. That's a violation of the speedy trial provision.
Well, okay, so you brought something up very interesting, and it relates to the war in Israel, because you are of the belief, I'm not saying that I am or not, but you are of the belief that Benjamin Netanyahu is basically a protege of Kissinger. He was raised by the globalist agenda. He was funded by them. He seems to be a pretty intelligent guy. I've seen him interviews. He knows his history. He knows about going back to the 6 Day War. He talks about that a lot, and all the way back to the Balfour. So that's what I want to ask you, just real quick. The Balfour Act, or the Balfour Declaration, that was a Rothschild thing, who were actually Jews. They are not, and they'll even tell you themselves, they are not aristocracy. Because to be aristocrats, you have to have people that have fought in wars, and basically nobility. They were never nobility; they were bankers, and they put nobility in debt to them. My question is, was that a benign act, or was that also a strategic act? The Balfour Declaration.
Well, these questions of conspiracy and the good things that they've done, like the Balfour Declaration, reestablishing a homeland for the Jews, are complex, because part of this is the Lord trying to reestablish the promises he made to the fathers about reestablishing the Jews in the house of Israel. And confusion reigns amid Christians, including Mormons, that means that the Jews are blessed by the Lord and protected by the Lord. But that is not true. The Lord often fulfills promises strictly because he made them to the fathers, the original Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he's going to fulfill them superficially, but he cannot override the ultimate justice of not blessing people that are unrighteous.
Wickedness, right?
Wickedness.
And Israel's never. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Let me just say this real quick, and I'll let you finish. Israel never was rescued because of their righteousness all the time. It was because of the symbology of the Abrahamic covenant. It was because of that Abrahamic pact between them and the Savior. Go ahead.
And so, I've been to Israel many times, and I'll tell you, it's like a typical Middle Eastern city. A lot of honking of horns and shaking of fists and screaming expletives at people. It's a noisy, it's just not a religious city. Now, there are these that charge a lot of money and make a lot of millions of dollars out of tourism of the so-called Christian and sacred holy sites, but they're mostly a sham. And most of the Jews there are secular Jews. There are of course, ultra-Orthodox religious Jews, which have been corrupted by the fact that they all take government money for their schools, and they wouldn't exist, and neither would any of their ability to study the Talmud day and night, if they weren't getting Israeli government subsidies, which we know is a violation of the freedom to be free from redistribution of wealth. There are a few Jews in Israel that are what I consider the true sheep of the Lord in Judaism. They have their own non-communist kibbutzim. Kibbutz system is a socialist system that used to be that they take children away and raise them by a committee rather than by parents. That's how Marxist they were. In fact, the state of Israel was started as a Marxist state where the Histadrut, the major labor union, controlled everything. And then it's only gradually gotten to be free market because, the people demand to be like the U.S. in many regards, but it's still very, very much a controlled state, especially, in its politics. I mean, they removed, for example, all the Jewish settlers on the Mediterranean coast in the Gaza Strip, supposedly to save them from the attacks or the expense of defending those people. They lost all their land, their productive factories, their productive farms and everything, and it was supposed to bring peace. And did it bring peace? Not at all. The radical Hamas came in, took over from the PLO, and radicalized the entire Gaza area. And we have had every 5 years a Gaza intifada or uprising that has attacked Israel. And Israel, as in this attack, as I explained before, invited this attack by withdrawing 80% of the Gaza regime from southern Israel so that it was undefended when Hamas came in. And the security elements on the fence were shut down so that when the broaches by bulldozers happened, that they couldn't reach them and stop those inflows. That was on purpose so they could go in and kill Hamas, which they allowed to progress. I mean, how do you get rockets and explosives and all that through the sift, through the filter of extreme product oversight of Israelis? I mean, it's just a lot of crap.
Especially with a high-tech firewall that they had there.
Yeah, a very high-tech firewall, but they shut down the electronic sensing and things to make sure that they weren't warned of it.
We're
I
going to
mean,
McDonald's, guys. Let's go. We're out of here for an hour.
this is a very complex conspiracy, but what it has to do with the last days, in my opinion, is that, and I don't give a lot of stock to trying to figure out the complexities of coded biblical prophecies
Well,
about
I asked you at the beginning, just real
Gog and
quick, about
Magog and
Bruce R.
Armageddon, all
McConkie. Do
this.
you align with a lot of what he said?
Only partially.
Okay.
The only thing I try to say is I try to look at what's real on the ground. I don't care whether there's 7 years of tribulations or 30 years. The point is, I know that Satan's going to have control of this world. There's going to be massive tribulation and wars and rumors of wars and internecine conflict. And much of that's going to start with this third world war, which our own government is going to allow to happen between Russia and China attacking the West. I don't think we'll ever have peace after that time. I think it's going to be chaos and control and a mark of the beast control system. And it's interesting that we get cut off eventually from what's happening in Europe because of the chaos that's happening here. And that's, of course, why the New Jerusalem has to be formed to give us a respite. But only the pure in heart will be allowed to get there. There's not going to be any call out from the pulpit. Too many yes men in the church would follow that. There's going to be, I believe, the true sheep get driven out by opposing the New World Order, by opposing the global government, by not going along. They get driven out much by our own members telling authorities, yeah, they believe in conspiracy. We ought to lock them up. There's a lot of division that's going to happen in the church over this, which is prophesied and is going to have to happen because the church as a body is not worthy of getting into New Jerusalem because they're just not following the promptings of conscience in the refined. They're just being yes men to leaders. Now, that said, I don't know. I do know what the major enemies of Israel are. They are, of course, the Arab nations and their promoters, which are China and Russia, which are going to be feeding them arms and ammunition. And how much China gets involved in this, because China will be the big block, major block of tyranny in the world after World War III. They're just numerous. Whether or not they're going to be directly involved, I don't know, and I really don't care. The point is, I believe the basic end time of the prophecy that Jerusalem and Israel is put under siege, and the two prophets will be called by the Lord to intervene. And whether or not they are LDS or Jewish prophets, I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is, if the Lord calls prophets, and they stop this Jerusalem from falling, and then are killed and lie in the streets for 3 days, and that's when the second coming comes. They rise up to meet the Savior coming. Mount of Olives splits in two, and the few Jews that are worthy remain, come up the ravine into the Mountain of Olives and see the Savior. And what are the marks in your hands and your feet? And these are the marks that I received in the hands of my friends. They are not converted, and that's where I disagree with McConkie. They're not Christian yet. They're not converted because they don't recognize who the Christ is. And I believe that Nephi was right when he said the church will be very small in the last days. And so the exponential growth of the church, which is happening, will probably, come to an end. It's already slowing down, except for Africa. And there's a great controversy in Africa right now because there's just hundreds of thousands being baptized in East and Central Africa, but not in Western Africa, because the mission presidents of Western Africa have seen the numbers of really unconverted friends of the church that have joined because other people are joining in Africa, and they've decided we're going to go for quality rather than quantity. And I'll tell you, I was on my mission in Uruguay and almost 50 years ago. And I'll tell you, that's where all that high pressure baptism and gold.
Yeah.
And it does lead to the uneducated, the simple people coming in through friendshipping in the church. And that's not enough to sustain a testimony.
Well, okay. So let me just explain to some of the members that don't quite understand what you're saying, because I went on a mission too. Lauren C. Dunn was my area president over my mission president. He was about numbers. We remember that. My mission president would butt heads with him because my mission president was about, are they converted? So numbers are important, but we're doing what President Nelson said. We're trying to gather Israel. What does that mean? We're looking for the elect of God. We're looking for those who are prepared to hear the gospel. There are people that do join the church for wrong reasons. There are people that join and they don't know, they want to be part of a good fellowship of things. There's nothing wrong with that as long as they're if they are going to gain a testimony someday, But remember, you don't need baptism to get into the terrestrial kingdom. Baptism is for the celestial kingdom only. So I want my members to know that you're not saying something that's unconventional. That is something that's always been a tug of war between mission presidents and general authorities. Do we just dunk them left and right? And then they'll bring up that scripture from the Book of Mormon where it says that many gathered and were baptized in the river, the Sidon River. But my point is that those people were also prepared by the Holy Ghost. They just happened to be a lot of people at the time. So yeah, that's not something new. I think that there are those who are converted in big numbers, and there isn't a big pouring out of the Holy Ghost like what happened in Kirtland and what happened in the day of Pentecost. But I understand your point.
Well, there isn't, in fact, there isn't hardly ever any of those outpourings like you saw on the day of Pentecost. That's just not what the Lord is doing. Now, I can tell you that it's a mixed bag. I know that there are many people that have been brought in through high pressure missionary work that didn't really have a testimony that eventually gain a testimony, or their children who are born to them gain a testimony, become faithful missionaries. I've seen that happen in Latin America. But there's also a tremendous burden on the church of inactivity and having to visit and try to reconvert people. And it's much harder to reconvert once they've fallen away. But you see, one of the litmus tests that I used on a mission, I wanted to see a person really love to read the Book of Mormon and feel and have him bear testimony that he really, if you as a missionary have to go back and, did you read this? No, I didn't read it. Did you read? No, I never. And then you still baptize them because they can say yes to the two questions. They aren't really converted. And I think there's some minimum standards that need to be improved in missionary work to make sure that they really have a love of the Book of Mormon, because that's a test of one's spirituality, to see what they can feel in the Book of Mormon.
Well, and I think that was my point too, is that what you're saying is not something that even the brethren don't get in disagreements about. How missionary, the philosophy behind it. Like you said, do we let somebody join that maybe later their children are going to gain a testimony? They might not, but they're bringing their children up in the gospel who might be the future leaders of the church. So, there's different theories on how that should be approached as far as conversion.
Well, nevertheless, complete submission to the will of the Lord. Not obeying the commandments only. It is the essence of all covenants, is being submissive to the will of God. And that, and only that, through conscience. And so when you see a person say yes to the commandments, but they're violating all the promptings of conscience, they're not disciplining their children, they're not eating right.
Well, I'm thankful for the atonement of Jesus Christ that allows that mercy to come in too as well.
But you see, when you get a prompting not to eat that junk food or not to buy that pack of donuts, it's never a commandment, but you're getting an individual prompting not to do it. And you say, no, I don't want to do it. I want to eat that anyway. All right. Which means changing and not doing it again, and then you don't have to pay the price. But if you continue up to the day that you died rejecting promptings about physical things, you're going to have to pay the price for that. That's what it looks like. And the covenants don't cover that. The atonement doesn't cover that. Everything that you have said no to the Lord is an act of rebellion, and you've got to pay the price yourself. And suffering that the Lord said you don't want to go through. Now, why does it have to be very painful suffering? Except those that have really gained purity of heart. Some people do go to this life without they've gained perfection of the heart. There are people like Hiram Smith. The Lord said, I love Hiram because of the integrity of his heart. You've got to actually change and become submissive. And that means really paying very close attention.
Was it Joseph Fielding Smith that stated that many members of the church will be in the terrestrial kingdom?
That's right.
Because of their not being valiant. It doesn't
have anything to do with the testimony of Jesus Christ. That's what the scriptures say. But that's a mask for the thing.
Because even the terrestrial kingdom is glorious and they have the Savior.
But you see, it's too easy to testify of Jesus Christ.
Right.
It's a whole different ball game to listen to the voice of Jesus Christ in your conscience telling you not to do certain things that you want to do. And people don't realize that excuse that we're all imperfect and none of us are going to be perfect. Well, that isn't true. Look, when I got my lesson from the Lord about listening to conscience, which was a very shake-up call, and I started to listen to every little prompting I was getting to the day, you know what telegraphed into my mind? Boy, the Lord really is interested in perfection if you let him.
No doubt.
If you really start to listen, and you listen to all those little corrections during the day in detail, you'll be on a road to perfection. And you'll be much further ahead. Even if you don't reach it completely, you're showing the Lord that you really love his voice, not the false voice of the unconditionally loving Christ, but the very detailed voice of correction of the Lord. And you'll learn to love it because he's directing you to become much, much better than even your innate spirit.
Well, he's not lukewarm. You're right. He's not lukewarm about his commandments. He wouldn't give commandments if they weren't
that you're incapable of obeying. That's why every prompting you get in conscience that you know is true, that you should do, you're capable of doing.
So I've lost 24 pounds. I've lost 24 pounds.
And have you stopped? Are you satisfied with that level?
No, I'm going to keep going.
Okay.
And I want to do what's right, and I want to keep the commandments. I love my Heavenly Father. Hey, I know we've been on for an hour, but can I ask you something? Somebody emailed me 13 questions they wanted me to ask you. A lot of them I can't ask online or on Zoom or, on YouTube. But I was wondering, if I sent that to you, would you maybe within the next month take time to just jot down a sentence for an answer? I know you're busy, but I could share them with my audience. I can email them to you. Is that okay?
Yes, I won't promise to be able to answer them in a sentence because they're probably going to involve.
Well, if you can do it longer, that's fine. I just didn't want to take up a lot of your.
That's going to be a problem if it requires too much nuance and complexity to explain, which most of them probably will. But send the list.
I will.
The best I can.
And then I would love to share. What I'll do is I'll post it somewhere where my audience can read it privately. That way, because some of them are about conspiracy that maybe YouTube is temperamental. You know that.
Oh yeah.
And like Ezra's Eagle and just stuff like that I don't get into very much. But I'll send them to you. But he sent them to me. So I'm keeping my promise to you, brother, that I told you I would give him those questions.
All right.
Before you leave, brother, because I know we're strapped for time, what are your last words about what's going on in Israel? Is this going to escalate? Can we see nuclear war?
No, not out of Israel. There's never going to be peace between the Israel and the Palestinians. There's never going to be peace between Israel and Iran. And I think there eventually will be. This is a temporary abatement of the war. It's when the U.S. resupply happens with missiles, then the war will be on with Iran, and Iran will be eventually destroyed, or at least the military portion of Iran. And it's going to create more hatred in the Middle East than we've ever seen before. So don't expect there ever to be peace in the Middle East. It'll end up in the Battle of Armageddon and mostly the destruction of Israel, except for a few in the city of Jerusalem, but it's not going to be pretty. But the Lord will prevail, and he will come down there as a final promise to the fathers to rescue Israel, but only the real faithful will proceed to actually be rescued.
Thank you so much, Joel.
My pleasure, Cliff.
No teddy bear Jesus, right?
That's right.
All right, you have a good one.